Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Please scan the QR code and do the event check-in. This will give you access to additional resources and information about events that we are running on Reactor, which are around similar topics to today's session. Also, you will be able to access links from today's session. I will share the event check-in link and the QR code again with the event ID in the Q&A section shortly. You need to enter the event ID after scanning the QR code. Please do keep an eye on the chat section for further details. Thank you all again for joining us today. My name is Rashmita and I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor. The session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Reactor YouTube channel. I will share the link to our YouTube channel in the chat section soon. Quick word on a code of conduct. We display this at all Microsoft Reactor events that we run, and it's just a reminder to be aware of others. The key thing to take out here is to be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Also, please keep your mics muted during the session. I would now like to welcome Swaminathan, our speaker for today's session. Swaminathan works as an architect in a leading IT firm. For his outstanding contribution to the developer community and .NET Foundation community, he has been awarded Microsoft Valuable Professional since 2016. But for now, I'll hand over to Swaminathan to begin the session. Over to you, Swaminathan.
Hey, thank you so much for that quick intro, Rashmita. Hey guys, good afternoon and good evening. Thank you so much for joining in this session today. I was just telling a few minutes back that it really is good to see a lot of people are spending their time in the evening to learn something new, right? So thank you so much for joining in. And let me quickly start sharing my screen and then we can get started with the session. I hope my screen is visible now, right? All right, so
yes.
Thank you. Thanks for the confirmation. Yeah, I know it's a bit of an introduction, it's already done. So the session is around building RESTful services with .NET. And this is a quick introduction about myself. I work as an architect at Maersk, and I'm a Microsoft MVP and developer technologies. And I also organize a couple of meetups in Bangalore. And those are my social handles, where you can follow me, right? So the agenda is this, right? So we will start with the basic understanding of what is a RESTful service, why do we need to build one, and what are the different concepts when we start building the services, right? And then again on the web API, right? So what is the .NET web API, and then what kind of things it offers, and we'll also learn some of the important concepts in web API, and then it's going to be more of demo heavy session today, right? So I'll just have few slides to run through to set the context, and then we'll get into the demo part. So what is a REST service, right? So typically this is like a textbook definition, right? So REST is an architectural style for building web services. I'm sure everyone would be aware of web services, right? That means there is some service which is hosted somewhere where you will be able to connect to and then do certain operations, right? I think if you're from .NET background, you would have heard like SOAP-based services using WCF or things like that. If you're from other programming languages too, there were always SOAP-based services, right? So, but REST is an evolution of that, and REST requests are made over the HTTP. Right, but with SOAP, there are a lot of other things comes into picture. It uses a different protocol, etc. But with the REST, everything is on HTTP verbs, and those are the same HTTP verbs which our browser uses to really load any content or post any data, etc. The moment you fill in any of our requests for whatever the Bing.com or docs.microsoft.com page, whatever the browser does is requesting for a specific web page, right? The similar thing, what if we want to, we can use it and then build on the API side, right? That's where the REST comes into picture and it helps us. So there are certain verbs which we need to be aware of while building the REST services. So one thing is get, as the name says, it is an operation to retrieve the data from the web service. And post, it is where you would, this is the verb which you would use to post an data or create a new data in the web service side, right? And put is where you want to update. Let's say if you're building an API for taking visas or taking employee details. So if you want to update specific information, you use a HTTP put verb for that. And patch is something which is similar to put, but what happens in patch is you don't really replace the entire document or so. When you say document, the API content, whatever you're taking the data, but it will be only a specific portion of the data is what you would try to update in patch APIs. And delete is obviously to delete an item on the web server, right? So these are some of the bare minimum or the basic HTTP verbs which we would need to be aware of, and we should know when to use what, right? And why building REST services when you had SOAP and different other things for a long time? One of the important thing is lightweight, because REST by default, it works on JSON. Of course, you can also use different serializers to change it. But one of the thing is it's lightweight, and it makes it more easy. The data transfer, payload and all are a little lesser here. Right. And the second thing is it works on HTTP protocol. So there's no need of any new additional protocols, anything needed here. Right. And then one of the important advantages is any client can consume the web API, right? So be it you're building a web application using MVC or any kind of a single page application framework or whatever be it, right? That particular web application can consume a REST API. And even if you're having a mobile backend or mobile application, be it an Cordova based or Flutter based or any kind of a mobile application, if you want to serve some data for that mobile app, you can have your REST APIs as a backend for it. Right. And also, of course, another API can also be a consumer of one of the APIs. Right? So that brings a lot of flexibility for us. You just kind of build one and then you are able to cater to different sorts of consumers. And easy to scale. So what I mean by that easy to scale is REST is primarily like a stateless. That's one of the things which you would always hear when we talk about REST, right? So what is stateless? That means, let's say if you're firing at 2 requests, right? So each of these requests are completely disconnected. There will not be any state maintained or persisted between these 2 requests. So with MVC and different other protocols, you can also maintain sticky sessions and things like that. That would make it little difficult to scale. It's not that it's not possible to scale, but it's much easier to scale your services if you're building on REST-based protocols, right? These are some of the initial wise parts of why we want to build it, right? And when we want to build on REST, we also need to know of some of these HTTP status codes, because that's how the APIs would respond, and then the consumers can understand whether it's a successful API operation or failed or whatever, right? So these are the different response. Whatever you see on the left hand side, 200, 2xx are the ones for the successful requests, and 4xx, what I call xx 400, 400 and 403, all are more on the request specific issues. If bad requests, unauthorized, and different use cases, you would use different of these codes. And these are more on the internal server errors, and if there are any issues with your gateway and things like that. Right? So we could typically you would see any of these different status codes. Of course, this is not the exhaustive list. There are many more status codes available which you could look up on the internet and identify which one is really needed for which kind of a use case. Right? But these are something which are most commonly used, so I just wanted to capture them here. Right. That's a quick introduction about REST, right? Now coming into Web API. So .NET Web API. Right? So Web API in .NET, it's basically ASP.NET Core based framework to build the REST APIs, right? Anytime you hear about .NET Web API, it is to build an Web API, right? That it's as simple as that. And when you want to build an Web API, you should be aware of certain concepts. So one of the things is, first thing is every .NET Web API. Somebody has a question. Okay, I think that's an accidental unmute. So whenever you want to create an web API in .NET, you would need to inherit your API controller. Controller is what is an endpoint which you would expose it to an external world, and that controller is where would serve the data. And the controller is what would respond with the appropriate status codes which we saw in the previous slides, right? And how do you create a controller? You would be inheriting the controller from a controller base class, which brings its own goodness into it, and simplifies a lot of things for us. We'll look at what are the things in the subsequent slides and in the demo part, right? And then the other part is around the attributes. Attributes are nothing but you would be adding additional functionality or by means of attributes to an existing class or so in .NET, right? So two of the primary attributes what we would use, API controller and then the routes. So routes is another thing which is very, very important. So this is one of the other concepts which we would need to be aware of when we are really dealing with web APIs. Right. I'll just highlight the things what we need to be aware of, and then over the course of the demo, I will be explaining how each one is being used, right? And also another important thing is on the API documentation. So let's say you've built an API controller. Like how would others know what are the endpoints which are available? And in that endpoints, how would anyone consume that endpoint? What are the requests you are taking? What are the response you would be sending from the API, etc. Right? That's where the API documentation is very important. And the documentation you're using OAS is nothing but Open API Spec. OAS 3.0 is the latest one. So that's one of the things which we could use to share the API documentation, so that the consumers need not have to worry about how it is built under the hood. All they would need is, yes, this is the endpoint A. This is taking maybe two strings as a parameter, and then it is returning maybe another string as an output or so. Right? If you put it somewhere as a documentation, then people can look at it and then they can start consuming the APIs. This is very important when you're building web APIs. Right. And then also when you start building multiple such APIs or multiple controllers, you also need to handle some of the things as a cross-cutting concerns. So there will definitely be a lot of cross-cutting concerns coming up. So filters is one of the means to handle that. We'll also look at it how in the demo part. And other part is around the API versioning. Let's say you put out your API and then the consumer started to consume it already. And now if you want to make a change to an existing API, maybe it could be a breaking change, right? So you can't simply make that breaking change, right? What would happen is then it would mean all of your consumers needs to undergo the change on their side. Maybe you might not, you would have added a new parameter, and if you make it a mandatory, then the API would start failing unless all the consumers make a change, right? In such cases, to have backward compatibility and everything in place, you would need to also enable versioning of your APIs. And of course, security is one of the important aspects to consider. So we also need to implement authentication authorization as part of our APIs, right? So in this particular session, I wouldn't be demoing only on the authentication authorization bits, but other than that, rest of all the things we can see it, so that will help you to get started and then get up and running with the web API, right? Some of the details about the API controller. So when you implement when you add an attribute as API controller, these are the different stuffs it adds. What I would suggest, I would do is I'll just skim through these presentations. We can move on to the demo, and then I'll explain all of this there. Okay, these are just for reference perspective. So I will explain when the demo on what each one is about, and then you'll be able to relate it better. All right. Yeah, routing also, there are two types of routing. Converged routing is what was being used for the MVC type of applications. If you're completely new to .NET, don't worry about it. MVC is something with model view and controller, in which you will have basically your entire web app will be rendered on server side, and then the app would return a view, which the browser will just simply render it there. Right? That's the routing, which the routing what was used for MVC is a conventional routing, and whatever is primarily used in WebAPI is an attribute-based routing. We'll also show what attribute-based routing is and how it can be enabled, etc. And yeah, I think I just talked about this, about API documentation, what is the open API specification, and then why it is needed, etc. Right. Okay, I think, yeah, and then the filters also, I think we just spoke about, and we can get into the demos. So I want to make it more demo heavy, but just to drive the conversation initially, I just put together this slide. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and see how we can get started. All right. I hope everything is clear and you guys are able to see me. Okay. Cool. Okay, so first thing, first to get started, what you could do is, if you're completely new, just go to .NET, right? And then here you find a lot of resources to get started with .NET. So as you can see, these are the different kind of workloads or the different kind of applications you can build with .NET. And what we are discussing today is around the web or the microservices. It comes under both of this. So if you go onto the web, you can see different kinds of web applications that can be built to. Web apps, that's the full stack web apps, and then the APIs. This is what we are trying to focus on today, right? To go and click on the APIs, you get details about all the different APIs. You also have an, when they get started, will take you to the learn module, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, so you can get started here. And then this is an excellent module to get yourself started with Web API, right? So what we would do is, I'm not going to look at this completely and follow through it, but we would do similar lines in a local, and then I will also add some of the other things which is not covered in this particular module, right? Because this is the first step which will help you get started with the web API. But what we would do is we'll also understand how the attributes are added, and then what kind of filters we are adding and things like that, right? Okay, so with that said, I think, yeah, I hope this thing is visible. So I am going to run this. Excuse me. I'm going to run these demos on .NET 5. Right? That's the SDK which I have. So once you have your .NET CLI installed, you can go ahead and check .NET list SDKs, and then you should be able to see this, right? So this is what is the thing which I'm going to use, right? 5.0.301, right? And then once that's done, you can also say .NET new, which will show all the different templates, whatever is available for us to work on. And here you must see something like API. Web API here, right? Maybe I'll just make this on screen. Yeah, so this is the Web API template, which is what we are going to use today to create our API. Solution. Okay, so I'm going to say .NET new Web API, and then I'm going to create one in the live Web API demo folder, right? .NET new Web API would give you a new API. Basically, it is going to scaffold the Web API project, and then it is going to create the code for us. Let's go ahead and quickly understand what are the different pieces in it, and then we can start exploring another API code base. Right. Okay. I think I opened the entire folder. Let me get into that. Yes. So this is a basic scaffolded project what we get when we get a new web API. So some of the things which we need to be looking at is the CS project, where it tells what is the kind of project it is. And then by default, it adds this package reference /buckle.ASP.NET Core. So this is the default one which is being used to create the create the documentation, right? And then, yeah, another important thing is on the startup.cs file. That's where a lot of magic happens for us when a new .NET project is created or new web API application is created, right? So like I said, the controllers or the endpoints, that's where you will have an endpoint created, right? So for example, this is a weather forecast controller, right? And as you can see, this controller is inheriting or it's inherited from controller base, right? And this has a lot of things in it. So basically, what I mean by a lot of things in it, let's say, like I mentioned, in a get API response, you need to send as a 200 as one of the responses, right? So you don't have to annually create that. So controller base automatically takes care of that for you. There are different methods available in it which would help us in achieving those actions. I'll show that in another sample project in a while, right? And also another two important attributes, like I was showing, it's the API controller that will help to understand this is an API controller, and then also the route, right? So this is how the request would get routed to this particular controller. So what this means is within this particular square brackets, if you put a controller, the routes would be handled with the controller name, right? So that means any request to this particular API with the /weather forecast would basically route the request to this endpoints here. So here it has only one endpoint, so you don't see any other route options in this particular action. But if you have more endpoints coming up, then you can add the route attribute at action levels also, right? And another important thing is around the logger part. I think this is also another goodness from ASP.NET Core, right? So you have a built-in logger available as part of your DA dependency injection, and then you could very well inject it, and then you can add all your log statements and everything here. Right. So this is the basic controller code what we get when we scaffold out of our this one. Okay, sorry. And then other few things, yeah. So now the another thing to understand is on the startup page, right? So how these controllers are wired up, right? So if you can see, there is this services configuration called services.add controllers, right? So this will ensure all of the new controllers which are created in this particular project, whichever is inheriting the controller base, all of them are getting added to the services, right? And then the AP documentation part. This is how the AP documentation is created. And just to enable this is where the swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core is being used, right? So we have this Swagger thing, and then it will create the documentation. I will also please show how the documentation looks like. Right. This is around the adding all what capabilities into the .NET API project, .NET API service here, right? And when it comes into how the application would work, so this is another thing. Okay, I think I should have done with no HTTPS for simplicity. I didn't do it. That's okay. So other thing is app.use routing. So this will enable the routing is properly happening, right? And here is where we are telling that we are mapping the endpoints using the controllers, right? So these two are important to enable the routing of the calls to the appropriate endpoints in the controller, right? So now let's quickly run through this application, and then maybe we could start looking at another demo application, right? So to run through this, the easiest way to make changes and then look at it is to do a .NET watch, right? I'll try to make it here. Oops. .NET watch run. So what this does is it will keep on watching the files, whatever is getting changed, and then oops, it was the wrong one. I think so. So basically, this will watch the files in the file changes or anything, and then it would reload the entire page. That's what it is. So yeah, now and as you can see, when the application is up, it is listening at localhost 5001 and the HTTP port is 5000, right? And the Swagger is automatically generated for us using that particular service which we added in the file, right? Which I showed in the startup CS page. Right? This is how the Swagger is getting generated here. Right. And yeah, so this is how others can look at. Basically, if you want to share this particular Swagger link or so, then people can just look at this and then they can understand, yes, this is one of the weather forecast is one of the controller, and this has this endpoint, and these are the details it is doing. You can also even try it out from here. When you say execute, because it doesn't take any parameters, it is blank here. When you say execute, it will execute it. You also get a curl command from that. And then you'll also see the request body here, right? That's how the basic .NET API project or the API works, right? This is step one, right? Just to understand how things are added into the project and then what are the things available, etc. Right now, let's start building, further controllers and then start understanding more concepts around what we just saw understand the concepts what we saw in the slide deck, right? I hope my page is fine. Just trying to look at if there are any questions or something, just feel free to post it in the chat window. Okay, I will be taking a look at it too. Just a second. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I don't see any questions or anything so far, so I assume it's good. Okay, now what we could do is I've also created a basic, a demo code or a project with all the demos in it. In the interest of time, I don't want to, take a lot of things. So maybe we'll quickly take a look at that particular code and then we'll understand a lot of things. So we'll go back to the other one. Need this. Oops, some reason it's not closing. Okay, yeah. So the same particular thing on this particular sample code or whatever I have, it's already committed to the Git. I'll also share the link of that particular GitHub repository in the chat window. Okay, and then you can take a look at it. Right. So this is same thing which we just have weather forecast controller. What I did is I added further more controllers and other services and etc. Right. Now quickly, if I can run this app to show what are the different things we have in here. Right. .NET what? Yeah. So to this. Yeah, so these are the different, the controllers which I've added, like you see, without even getting into details of what is what, we can look at from the Swagger spec here, right? So then these are the different demo bits which I have created also to show something around the async part and then about the file upload parts and then the basic pizza controllers and the routing and things like that, right? We'll also see how some of these are created and how we can, add things or edit individual documentation, etc. Yeah, fine. So first thing, let's go ahead and explore this pizza controller, right? So here is where we kind of added all the HTTP endpoints. Basically, so we have one for get and then one for post and then one for put and then HTTP delete also. Right, pretty straightforward things, right? So if you want to create an HTTP get based endpoint, you would add a particular method. This name could be anything here, right? What matters is the HTTP get attribute what you're going to give, and then this means at the under the pizza, this one / pizza, you will have your ID specified here, right? And take a look at this part, right? This not found and other things. So this not found is something which is coming from your controller base. So whenever you want to return like a 404 as a response, right? You don't have to really create a lot of code for that, right? What you would use is just say not found, and then it automatically returns a appropriate response for you. And on this holds good for different kinds of HTTP verbs or different actions too. In the case of post, what we would need to do is basically we want to ensure that the document is created or the data is created at the API level, right? So that we can say that created action is another endpoint or the method which is available in controller base, as you can see here. And then you can tell whatever you want to, respond as part of that. So all these things would help us in basically, get up and running faster, and also you can create in a standardized fashion, the consistent fashion, right? For example, now to run this particular pizza application, right? So when I do a get, as you can see, the request URL is this, right? Localhost 5000/pizza. And this 5000 is the default one. You can also change it by different means, right? But for now, I'm just going to leave it at 5000 as a default port, right? /pizza is the endpoint, which is mapped to this particular method, like the get all method, because we don't have anything available which just says pizza service.get all. All right. So what's done inside this is another static class which is created here. So all it does is just from in memory, it is just trying to return this pizzas array. right? That's all. So we don't have any kind of an CRUD with the DB here. The point what I wanted to convey here is more on what goes in the controller level, and then what are the things we can do at the controller and the layers above it. So with this idea, you should be able to add more layers, like if you want to add a service layer or a repository layer, and then you can also use dependency injection to wire up the entire application. We'll also show how dependency injection is done here, right? So maybe that. Yeah, and this HTTP get /ID, right? So what you could do is you would have another endpoint here, which would just say get /ID, right? And you can also say try it out, and then maybe say just 3, right? When I say 3, it finds it, so it kind of I think it doesn't find it. I think we have only till 2. So this is the kind of response what you get, right? And these things are all automatically coming from the not found thing what we've added, right? And also, if you just go ahead and search for a valid one, obviously you'll get a response of 200 here, right? So if you look at it, we were just from a documentation perspective, right? This API, if you look at the documentation here, all it says is, yeah, this is an pizza/ID is what you need to pass as part of the route, and then it is going to respond with 200 success here, right? In case of errors, what it is going to produce is something which is not really called out here, right? In a typical case, what we would want to do is we also need to call out what are the different set of errors that would come out of this API, so that the consumers are clear on what kind of errors they can expect, right? When it will return 400, if it's returning 400 as a bad request, what are the details it is going to give, right? Or if it's 404, what are the details it's going to give, etc. Right? It's a good practice to add those things as well to the documentation. Yeah, on the same lines, yeah, these are HTTP post. And another important thing is there are different ways you can have a response created. So if you look at the weather forecast controller, right? What we did is we were directly returning an enumerable of weather forecast, right? I think it was just creating an enumerable, and then to array it was just returning the data, right? This would get encapsulated into an okay object, okay action result, and then it will get responded to the clients. Okay, this is one way of doing it if you know the right type what you want to respond, right? Otherwise, if you want to make it a little more generic, you can use something like this action result also. Action result with list of pizza, if you give it, then using all these return not found and other things would become much easier for us, right? So here also, if you look at it, though we say action result with list of pizza, it just this pizza service at GetAll is returning a list of pizza, right? So this also automatically get encapsulated into your action result, and then it will be sent as an okay there. These are different ways how you can really respond or create the responses of your web API. And also you can see this create method has something called iAction results. That's the interface, and then created at action is one of the implementation of that, right? So this is what we would use to create or create a pizza. So right. And yeah, so now just to look at the post. So here also it says try it out, and then yeah, this is the parameter what we have. Maybe I'll just say veggie double or whatever, and then gluten free, yes. So just say execute, and this says validation errors. Right. Okay. So this is one of the other goodness what we get by having that API controller in place. So if you want to add any kind of model validations, right? So what we have done is we have sent this particular input as set a particular payload as an input to our controller, right? But what we got is this is the response, right, with 400 bad request. You can also see that this is undocumented here because we have not really added documentation for that, right? But the point is here, yes, the field name must match regular expression. So just to simulate and bad request kind of an error, I kind of added this. And how I did this, if you go and look at the code for create pizza, there's nothing which is done specially for doing any of the model validations here, right? So that's what is it's done under the hood for us. So how this is taken care of is if you go into the pizza model, I've added these annotations here, right? The required, and I also added regular expression for the name, telling A to Z and then A to Z plus. That means it can only take lowercase or uppercase characters. So just for simulation, I just put that. Since I think I added a space in my name, it kind of threw the error, right? So the point to convey here is getting and doing any of these model validation is available out of the box for us. You don't have to write any special code in your controller level per se. But what you need to do is you need to put the right annotations on your model which you are using it as a payload, right? So that brings to another point. So how does this model get bound into this particular pizza model? How does this JSON, whatever we send, is bound to that particular pizza object here, right? That's also taken care internally by the controller base. So basically, there are multiple steps which runs. One of the steps before the control reaches the controller is a model validation or the model binding. So as part of that, this particular JSON, if it's conforming to the structure what we have here, right? The framework could be able to deserialize it and deserialize into the object, and then you will get the object in your controller level. Okay, so serialization, deserialization of the objects are all already taken care for us. We just need to define the right models and then put the right validations in place, and then everything else is taken care. Yeah. Okay, so just to summarize, we just talked about how we can use different action results and then how we can use some of the controller-based related methods to really create the responses for these different actions, right? And also about the model validation. Right now, yeah, these are all other different checks. So here, bad request is written explicitly. Okay, sorry about that. Someone accidentally unmuted. Yeah, so here, if you have a question on why the bad request is explicitly done here, because this is more of a business logic related scenario, right? So what we are doing is in this method, we are trying to check if you're trying to update a pizza with an ID, that ID is not really matching, right? You can't really do it. So we have put this, right? So what I was trying before is, if at all you want to do a proper model validation on any of these objects, you don't have to do it yourselves. Earlier, if at all you are writing MVCR, so you would have this model state dot is invalid or something you will write, and then we'll throw a bad request or so. Right, all those are not required now. It's all happening automatically. And there are also options to suppress that if in case you don't like it and if you want to do by yourselves. But yeah, leaving it open is better. I mean, it's easier. Yeah. Okay. So and then yeah, these are around the different methods and these ones, right? So now route part. So now let's get into the route part, right? Just to check here. What was API controller attribute based routing? Okay, I'll explain that in this route part, and then automatic HTTP phone responses is something which we have covered, and all these things we would take it up next. Yeah. Now let's close this pizza controller. Right. So there are different ways you can define the routes. Right. So here, as you can see, I have not really added any kind of an default route on top of the API controller. Right. If you look at this guy here. Right. So here what we did is route of controller we did. That means everything coming with the controller name is by default routed here, right? This way, what one good point is you don't have to add this controller at every action method level, right? Inside this will be like your base. When I say base, after your hosting path, right? Here in this case it's localhost 5000 / pizza would be my base, right? After that you see the /id or so it will route this. But here I have not added that. Right. So now here what I have done is this is a HTTP GET method, and then I said here controller /hello. That means this by default it will take the controller name here, and then whenever I say hello, it gets routed to this particular endpoint here. Right. But here you can also see some more things. Right. I mentioned something like from query. For all the get methods or the get endpoints, whatever you attribute as get, and whatever the parameters you add here, by default it will start binding the parameters from the query. From the query string, right? That's what if you call as a URL params or query string, that's where it will take from, right? Sorry, this is a query string. Sorry, URL params is different. So this will take from the query string, but just to show that explicitly also you can do it. So here what I'm telling is this particular message is something which should be taken from the query string, and even the salutation also would be taken from the query string, right? So now to just to check that, I think this is the endpoint what we are talking about. So as you can see, /route demo is my controller name. So it says /controller /hello here, right? When I say try it out, it says two different parameters. One is a message, other is salutation. Maybe the message is Reactor, something like Rockstar. So right. So if I just do an execute, that it just prints it, nothing fancy there, right? Rockstar's Reactor. All right. So the point is here, as you can see in the URL. So this is how the query string is being formed and it is being sent. Right? But there are different ways you can send the data to. And if you come down further, so this is another route which I've created. There are two differences here. One is the route also I kind of created in this full fashion. Right? API /route demo /hello /message. Right? What does this mean? So here the option is that we are not really basing it as a route demo as my controller name, but we are giving an dedicated URL. right? If you ask me whether it's a good practice or not, that's a debatable question, but I'm just showing the different options and how you can really create these different routes. Right. So API/route demo/hello. And then here what I'm doing is I'm making it as part of the route itself. Right. So that means if I just say hello here, and also you can see in the documentation too. So here it says maybe Reactor. Right. This is the path, right? Hello/Reactor, and then the salutation maybe rockstar, whatever, right? So I'll just put it, and then as we can see, it says hello/Reactor, and then the query string will go here. Maybe in this example, it might not look very clear, but the point is, if in case you are trying to get certain things based on your ID, and still if you want to pass additional parameters to really do any other kind of filtering also, right? In such cases, you can use this combination of route params and the query strings, right? So that's about these two controllers and how the routes are defined here. Right, and there is also a different way you can also use this. This is basically another example of a post. Right, so here, as you can see, I try to put it in the same thing as this route demo. Right, so here we are telling route is API/route demo/hello. That's the route name, and then I've also added additional documentation here, or the annotations here, or the attributes here, which will generate additional documentation. Right, when I say consumes text/plain, that means it is going to consume an application content type of this particular text/plain alone. Right. This is another important thing. If you want to restrict your APIs to work with certain MIME types or certain content types, you can add them on as an attribute there, and then your API would, if you give anything else, you would get an 415 unsupported media type exception or so, right? And also I mentioned field that it's going to produce a response type of 201 here. All right. So now if you go and look at this particular endpoint down here, hello. So here it is taken as part of your query string again, right? That's why it says as query, right? Maybe just say Reactor and then execute. It's gonna send it this way, right? Hello, and then message equal to Reactor. You might not need this form in most of the post cases, because typically in a post method you will be taking a payload or so. So what you would need is a JSON, or maybe a possible or an ability to pass a JSON payload, which is what I kind of demonstrated here. Right? If you go to the API/route demos, this hello JSON, you can see this is example JSON body what you can send it. So maybe I'll just say hello Reactor. Let's see. Right. So you will receive a 4201 plus the appropriate this ones, right? Hello, how do you Reactor? Whatever we just passed. So this is done like this here, right? So here, as you can see, I have not really put anything like an from body or anything else, right? So there are also other attributes like from body. So by default, most of these post endpoints, unless you explicitly specify, right, it would consume from the body itself, right? If there is a complex data type like a model here, right? This model is defined here like this. I've just added two different properties to this. Right. So it is able to automatically bind that particular data into the model, and then we are just returning the data. Yeah. So those are different ways how you can create the routes, and then you can also play around how you want to get the payload. So for example, if you want to do a get operation, but if your search params are very heavy, if you don't want to pollute the entire query string or so, right, you could typically like make it as a post or something, and then get the payload, and then you can get the response out of it. If there are different use cases where you would choose one over the other, right? But what I'm showing is all the different possibilities what we have at hand to create such routes. Yeah. I hope you have got a fair understanding about the routes. So now let's go ahead and look at what shall we look at? The exception handling part, right? About the filters, and then maybe I'll go and look into the other parts. Or maybe quickly I can just show about this. This can do both, right? So what I did is, if you want to create and file upload kind of a scenario, right? So another thing which you want to show is around this type. There's something called form file which you could use, and then you could start implementing the file upload related functionality. Right. So here also again, this is another controller route, and then in this I'm telling the route is upload. So that means it would be controller / upload would be the endpoint which I would need to hit. I don't know if it's related here. You see, okay, file is there. Yeah. So here, if you expand this, right? So basically, this is a simple file upload thing where you can add different items. You can choose whatever files you want to upload, and then you can get that uploaded. This is one of a typical use case which a lot of us would face. Now, when you, as per this particular documentation, you see that it's available, right? and we didn't have a lot of details. What we had is only the code which says it's 202, right? But now when I did it, I got an error feeling, oops, something went wrong, and then it gave an 500 on the internal server error, right? This is a simulated case here. So what I did is I kind of, throw and not implement exception here deliberately, right? And if you look at it, this exception is not caught in this function or anywhere else, or in this controller, right? So how we could do that is by using something called a filter. So what I did is filters are nothing but there are in the life cycle of an API request, right? There's something called an action filter, which gets executed. So basically, before executing any actions are nothing but these individual controller methods, right? Before they get executed, these action filters get executed. So it exposes two different methods. I've implemented the action filter here. This is just one way of doing it. There are also other ways by implementing middlewares and ASP.NET Core, etc. But those are a little advanced. So I thought, okay, this is the basic one to cover us. So there are two methods: on action executing and on action executed. So here what I'm doing is I'm just checking if the exception is available. I'm just always returning a 500 here, right? Of course, this is a demo, so I kind of blanket put 500 and then I'm doing it. But the point is you could add additional checks in places here, and then you could handle these exceptions, your business specific exceptions, and then throw the appropriate errors and filling with the appropriate error messages, etc. So here I think check result is something. Okay, this is something. Sorry, bad keys. Yeah, so basically, the idea is you basically you centralize all of these exception handling part into one, so that in any controller, irrespective of, it's not just about this controller, right? Even in my pizza controller, if I'm not having any kind of a null check or something, and then if I'm making an error, right, you don't have to put try catch blocks in each and every of your action methods. The idea is you can extract them into a common place and create a filter or sort, and then you can handle it there, right? And yeah, just to see how it works, I'm just gonna comment out this and then this. So yeah, so as you can see, this is a list of iform file. That's the data structure what we have to take the files, right? And here I'm simply doing a simple thing around creating a response with file upload response, which will give the file name and its appropriate size, right? So now if you, I think since the watcher is running, it would have taken my changes and it would have rerun it. Yeah, as you can see, it says file changed, right? File controller.cs, and then it rebuilt it. So that's pretty neat for us to when we are really developing. And if I go back here and try it out and say add item, sorry. Hopefully it should work now. Yeah, so it says that this is the file name uploaded, and then the file says whatever is part of that particular file is what is just put in here, right? So the point is it's much simpler to create file handling, create controllers or the API endpoints to handle files, etc. Right? And you can see this is the content type which is being set for this, right? Multi-part form data, and these are the types what it is being sent. Yeah. Okay. So that's about exception handling using filters, and then how we can create a file handling kind of a controller. What else? Okay, next part is let's switch gears into the versioning part, right? And then I'll talk about async part in the end, right? So like I said, API versioning is very important for us to know what kind of API is available and then what kind of versions are available, etc. Right? So for that, we need additional NuGet package to be added. So maybe I'll just quickly show that here with API.cs proj. This is another package, Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC versioning. If you add that, you will get the capabilities of versioning. And there are also some more plumbing that needs to be done, which is present in the startup CS file, where, as you can see, we just added the services that add API versioning here, right? If you remember whatever I showed as part of the default template, you wouldn't find this, right? So this is how we are configuring this API versioning package in this. Right? What we're telling is the default API version is 1.2, and if somebody is not really using the versioning in their endpoint or the URL, we are just making it as a default, and then we are not failing it. So if you make this as false, none of our API calls would work. This will enforce the versioning in all the APIs. Right. I think it should build. Let me quickly show that, and then I can on to how it's done. So now if I go here and maybe the get pizza itself, right? And I say try it out. Yeah. So as you can see, it gives a bad request with this particular error message, right? Telling API version unspecified. right? So this is how you can start implementing and enforcing the API versions. So obviously you wouldn't want to do this if you have an existing consumer in place already. Oops. When I say existing consumers of your APIs, if somebody is there, you don't want to make this breaking change. Just to cover those cases is where you would use this flag and then make it a true or so, right? And once you set it up, you would for the existing ones you are covered, and for the new ones what you create, you could basically add the versionings. So how you could do it is you can also add this attribute called API version, right? Which I made as 1.0, and this is the route what we are telling, right? And this route is having API/v. This version would be something which will be coming as an parameter as part of your API request, right? Where you would set as 1.0 or whatever, and that gets bound here, right? And then here it just says hello. Right, so let us quickly check how this is done. And this is also important to map this controller action to which kind of API version we are using, right? And yeah, let me quickly show that. So version demo. So here is where you get this parameter, and then I'll just say 1.0 and execute, and you should see as hello here. Yeah, that's nothing fancy. So but the thing which got changed is, as you can see here, right? In the v1.0, here is where the version is getting added. Whatever the version we added here, that's going as part of the route, and that's what is mentioned in the controllers too. Right now, I also had created another version v2 of this particular action, right? Which just says hello with it's taking a parameter as a string message, right? And I made it as a required one. Right, I kind of added this settings because in this case, what happens is the Swagger generator doesn't honor two different endpoints with the same base path, etc. So I had to work around that. Maybe I couldn't figure out how it can be done. So I have to enable this. So that's the reason it wouldn't show up in the Swagger UI here, right? But what we could do is we could just copy this entire thing, and or maybe I should have something here already to speed up things. I do have one. So let me quickly bring that up and then create here one more. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing a curl here, if in case it's not visible. I'm just doing a curl here, right? And as you can see, the API v2.0 is what I'm calling with hello, right? Oops, sorry. And that should basically hit the new endpoint, and then it should return. And as you can see, I've also added the query string parameter here, right? Now this should be served from our new endpoint here. And it just says hello Swami, right? So that's how you can basically version your APIs the same endpoints and then provide different implementations for it. Yeah. And yeah, and other important some of the things to note or observe is in the logs by default you will get all these metrics, like when the request started and then when it is finished and then how long it took to respond and what is the content type which is part of this request, etc. Right, so you don't have to really create any kind of debug or watch a stopwatch or any kind of diagnostic statements to understand the response times of these individual endpoints. Okay. So let me quickly check. I think I just have only 5 more minutes, right? Yeah. So one last thing, maybe I can wrap it up with that, right? Is now that we kind of built the basic APIs, we understood what are the different kinds of routing and how are the different kinds of API versioning we can create and filters and things like that, right? Now, if you want to scale your APIs, right, how you can make it more scalable, right? That is where implementing an async kind of an scenario would help, right? So what I mean by that is in the other controllers, whatever we've been working so far, right? Be it the pizza controllers or the other weather controller or whatever, right? It was all like a synchronous APIs, right? What I mean by that is every time you get a request or every time a client makes a request to this particular endpoint, like get all, right? It will create a thread, worker thread or so, and then it will that will process this request, and then you will get back the response, right? So second. Okay, sorry, I might need to rush off soon. Yeah, so the point is, it is These are all like synchronous APIs, and what we have is an asynchronous API. That way, what would happen is you will be able to increase the throughput of your API. So basically, you can, let's say, with the synchronous API, if your API is able to take requests of maybe 50 requests or 60 requests per second, you can, if you want to make it more high throughput, maybe 100 TPS or whatever, right? You can make it more asynchronous. Of course, doing just asynchronous is not going to magically solve the things, but this is one of the ways to address that particular part, right? So what we can do is using async and await. So this is an async keyword which I've added on to this endpoint, and then I'm awaiting from this pizza service, which would basically return the data, right? So here, just to simulate, I kind of added the async service where I'm waiting for a few seconds and then return the pizza in an asynchronous fashion, right? But the point is, you can make it an asynchronous version so that you can make it better scale and things like that. Yeah, I know I kind of covered a lot of ground and content. I'm just trying to look at the questions here. Okay, I see a lot of questions are answered by Nish already. There's about Swagger. It is important to create REST APIs. Model.validate automatically getting called. Yes, that happens automatically now. I think that's given. And how do you design API for searching date ranges? So I assume it's if you want to build an API which where you want to filter the data based on the date ranges. So one of the ways which I've done is you can also take the range as a parameter on your API, or if you want to make it that's one way so that you will know what data to get it, right? Because obviously you want to know what is the range that the client is looking for. Right? Other options are like if you want to make it more dynamic with the pagination or so, you can also have your index start index and then in what is the last index which was loaded, and you could also pull additional items from there. Right. And how to use URL params. So I think I showed that in the demo here, right? So whatever you get as part of the URL parameters, you take it from the from route, right? And then you will be able to bind that into the appropriate parameter here in the controller, the action method, right? If it's from the query strings, yeah, you would make it as a from query. So I kind of try to put both here, right? You can see both the flavors. User response rate, yeah, I think I have yes answered it. So, and also I think you might have seen with regarding to the versioning part, right? I have also added this one to report API versions. That's why even though if you don't provide any version number, the response it gives like API supported versions 1.2, etc. Right? If it's more, if you don't have it, you will not really, your clients will not be able to see what kind of version it's being responded. Okay. All right. I think we just have only 2 more minutes. Are there any other questions? Any idea why this error? I'm not sure what error it is. Okay, so I can explain use endpoint middleware can register controller or MVC without use endpoint. I think it should be possible. I need to check on that part. But for this is primarily used for the attribute-based routing. If you are following an MVC route, I don't think this is needed, right? On the second part, model.validate, how to disable. There are certain suppression options available. I can link you back to the documentation, right? So there is, I think, in the as part of service configuration, we can suppress that. Automatic HTTP form responses, and yeah, so suppress model state invalid filter equal to true. If you just add it into our as a configure of API behavior options, right, then that would get automatically suppressed. Where the filters are mapped. Okay, that's a good question. Did I add it here anywhere? Yeah, I think I missed to show that part, right? So this is where we kind of add the filters. Services.controllers, and then I added the filters, both of these HTTP response exception. I think this log filter is no more, I didn't use it. But yeah, this is how you will add a filter into your request pipeline, right? And again, adding dependencies. Dependency injection is kind of done this way. There are different scopes. I just made it as a transient scope here. So this is the interface and this is the implementation which is needed. So that's how this controller will get an instance of async pizza service, and then it is able to hit the right async pizza service instance. question on .NET authentication. These requirements were not met. Deny anonymous authorization requirement, request authenticated user. So yeah, when you, I like I said, I haven't covered the security part because that by itself is a good 1 hour session we could go on. So basically, you can add additional attributes and then you can assign different things here. Like if you make it as authorize, right, then that means it would allow only calls which are secured calls, right? It doesn't allow any anonymous calls, and you can also add different deny rules. And with that, you would be able to achieve that. If a particular API is built that way, that means you can't really simply hit like this, what like opening Swagger and then hitting it. You would need to also provide the appropriate authentication means. If it's OAuth or if it's JAR token or whatever, you need to grab those tokens and then pass it as part of your authorization barrier or whatever. Yes, the Git link is a straightforward thing, which I will do it right away. Oops. .com and this is the link ASP.NET WebAPI Reactor BLR demo. Yes, on authorization authentication, yes, we could plan for further sessions. Thank you for that feedback. We will plan around that. And I'm sorry, I need to rush today. I have certain personal commitments now. So if there are any further questions, please keep it posted. I think the chat window would be open for some more time. When I get back, I will kind of respond on the chat. Yeah. All right, Rashmita, over to you.
Sure. Fine. Thank you, Swaminathan, so much for today's session, and thank you all for joining us today. Please feel free to scan the QR code displayed on the screen and do the event check-in. And please do share your feedback about today's session. It will help us to choose our topics that better suit our audiences. Also, please visit our Microsoft Reactor Bengaluru meetup page for more upcoming session. Thank you all once again and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you learned something new. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Swaminathan. Thank you, Rashmita.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.